I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is our review of the brand new Glock 45 9mm handgun. Now, this gun's only been out for a couple of weeks, and we snapped up a regular copy of it, a regular retail copy of it, as soon as we could to actually get out, get some trigger time on it, and bring you our impressions. Now, we have got 1,000 rounds, actually about 1,100 plus rounds on this handgun at this point in time, and so we've got a pretty good idea of how it stacks up versus its other brothers in the Glock lineup. Now, a little bit of history on the Glock 45. This pistol is a little bit of a departure in Glock's lineup because it does not follow the same overall pattern as previous guns. All the way back to the Gen 1 guns, there was a pretty good correlation between slide length and grip length, and when they moved up into the next generations, they maintained that same ratio of slide length to grip length through each of the models. And now they took a little bit of a side road on that when they announced the Glock 19X at the beginning of the year. The Glock 19X utilized a Glock 19 slide, but a Glock 17 grip length. So you had a 17 round magazine, but the more concealable 19 length slide. There were some other issues with the Glock 19 with the type of magazine well that it had on it, this little step that it had at the front of the grip, and some other things that caused it to kind of be its own thing when Glock announced the Generation 5 pistols. Now, the internals in the Glock 19X are Generation 5 internals, but the design on the outside of the handgun had some cues from the Generation 4 pistols and then had kind of its own thing going on as well. Well, the Glock 45 is definitely a Generation 5 pistol. It shares a lot of the same design features as the Generation 5 Glock 17 and the Generation 5 Glock 19, which we don't have a copy of right here. I purchased my Gen 5 Glock 17 after the 19X was announced because once I took a look at the 19X and shot the 19X, I really had no desire to purchase it whatsoever. There were a couple of things that were missing from the 19X that the 17 Gen 5 had that I thought made it a better idea or a better solution for what I wanted to do. A couple of the main features are the flared magazine well. You've got a natural built-in magazine flare in here, so you don't need to go add an external piece on like a lot of people were doing for carry magwells and things of that nature, which allow me to utilize the 17 in production class in competition and have that advantage without having to actually put anything on that would push me out of that class. Of course, it does have the ambidextrous slide release on here, so those of you that are lefties, you can swap the mag release over and have a full left-sided pistol or a left-handed pistol, which is a really nice option again for those guys that do shoot left-handed out there. It has the new 2-pin design that the Gen 5s went to, kind of harkening back to the earlier Glocks. But the rest of the internals really are not a huge departure from the Generation 4 pistols. The trigger pull is greatly improved in the Gen 5s over the Gen 4s, but a lot of guys will go to aftermarket triggers in the Glocks pretty quickly if they are doing any kind of competition work with them. For a carry pistol, the factory trigger is just fine. In fact, for most competitions, defensive type competitions, the stock trigger is going to be just fine. Although the Gen 5 that I have here, I haven't had any desire to go in and switch out the connector or any of that stuff. It's just fine right now. I do have a Glock Triggers competition trigger that we may be putting in here shortly. There were some things going on with that while they hammered out their Gen 5 design, but we may circle back around and get to that. So enough of the Glock 17 because you came here to see the Glock 45. So I wanted to talk about the 17 because a lot of those features are Generation 5 features that are found in the Glock 45. So we still get the enlarged magazine well. We still get the ambidextrous slide release. We still get all the same internals that we just talked about on the Generation 5 Glock 17. A couple of the big differences, though, is you will notice on the 17 that there is this half-moon cutout in the front of the magwell. And the purpose behind that is on the new magazines, there is a lip on the front edge of the magazine. So when the magazine is inserted, if you have a jam and you need to strip that magazine out, you now have access to this larger floor plate to be able to strip the mag with some force. And you still, of course, have the cutout in the back of the magwell that you can reaching up into the recess of the grip here, so you can pincher it with both fingers and pull your magazine out. So that's a little bit of a nice feature, but the problem that we have there is that this magazine, this Generation 5 magazine, will not fit in 19Xs. Again, 19X did its own thing with this little lip on the front of the grip, so Gen 5 magazines won't work in that Generation 5 pistol. Doesn't make a huge amount of sense. But that half-moon cut was released on the 17 and then on the Glock 19 when they initially came out. And a lot of users were complaining, especially on the 19, that cutout and then the lip on the magazine was pinching their pinky finger if it extended down over the edge of the grip. So Glock has removed that half-moon cut on the 17, the 19, and now the 45 has never had it. So going forward, they have resolved that on the at least the MOS pistols. I believe it will be coming into the regular Gen 5 pistols as well. But the magazines with the hook on them, the new Generation 5 standard magazines, will fit in the Glock 45 just fine. The only disadvantage is you don't have that extra room to pull those out. Now, the advantage, though, is with this design, pretty much everything else out there will fit. So all the previous design magazines, all the legacy magazines, Magpul, GL mags, all that will fit in the Glock 45. Now, again, this is a Glock 17 length grip and a Glock 19 length slide, so 19 magazines will not fit in here. It has to be 17 or larger magazines, so a lot of the 21 round magazines out there, the Glock 30 round magazines, or the regular Glock 17 plus 2 mags will fit just fine in the Glock 45. So there are some additional changes in the magazines. You notice that we have that orange follower. Again, that is a Generation 5 feature. Kind of nice overall. They really updated the magazines. Again, I just wish they hadn't have put that lip on there because that does interfere with some magwells. Now, obviously, this is a 19 that I've got here with a magwell. We'll talk about this in a minute. But if you have a magwell on a previous Generation 4 gun, then the Generation 5 magazines may not fit. Now, moving on to the other huge cosmetic difference that we have here is you notice we have front cocking serrations. Now, this seems to be a love it or hate it feature. For me, I love having front cocking serrations because it is very simple when you go to load the handgun to simply grab your magazine, insert your magazine, cock it, and then immediately come back up. Now, it's not the greatest thing in an administrative mode, but if you are shooting on the clock and you have to go from an unloaded handgun on the table to cocked and ready, then that is a whole lot quicker than power stroking the gun, then coming back and coming up. Now, from a regular training standpoint, if you are loading the handgun, then power stroking over the top, coming back to your shoulder, and then gripping the gun has a whole lot less potential to short stroke the slide, cause malfunctions, double feeds, all kinds of other things. But if you know what you are doing, then coming over and charging the handgun with front cocking serrations is a viable option. The one reason that I really like it is you end a string of fire, you're getting ready to put your handgun up. If for whatever reason you need to check the condition of the chamber, or maybe something felt funky or whatever, it's very easy just to roll over the pistol, glance into your chamber, release it, holster up, and then you're good to go. Now, there are a range of opinions on press checks. I do press checks fairly routinely. I have not had press checks cause a problem, but part of that is the way that I do them, the fact that I will press check and then lower the slide, and it's usually before a holstering activity. And when I holster with my thumb on the back of the slide. That makes sure that the slide is locked in battery as I put the weapon in the holster. This is critical because some holsters can push the slide out of battery when you holster up, and then when you go to draw the handgun, the slide may not pop back into battery, and you may get a click when you want it to bang. Obviously, that is a bad thing. Now, the nice thing about the front cocking serrations on the Glock 45 is if you don't like them and you don't want to use them, they're not in the way. They are value added. There's something I don't have to pay extra for, like I do if I sent the slide off to have cocking serrations machined into it. They come from the factory, so the factory finish is intact. All the factory roll marks are in the right place, so we don't have roll marks having to interrupt the serrations or have the serrations cut through the roll marks. So everything looks a whole lot more finished. It just works well, and if you don't like cocking serrations, you don't have to use them. One other really nice feature on the Glock 45 that I believe Glock has fixed going forward on all the newer Generation 5 pistols is they have bullnosed the frame to match the slide. Previously, and on my early Gen 5 Glock 17, the bullnose on the slide does not match up with the bevel on the frame, so there's a little bit of a gap there. This is purely aesthetic. It doesn't have anything to do with the way the handgun functions, but I'm glad that they resolved that on the 45. Now, the function of the pistol, we took it through a 1,000-round test, and really 1,000 rounds for a Glock is nothing. We use Blazer 115 grain training ammunition. I did get a chance to shoot some hollow point defensive ammunition through it. We only really had one malfunction through the entire run, and that was a failure to lock back on an empty magazine. And I actually believe the contributing factor to that is the shooter that this malfunction occurred on was wearing heavy gloves while he was shooting. He tends to shoot with a very exaggerated thumbs forward grip, so I believe it is possible that he engaged the slide release and had it held down, and so the slide just cycled over the empty magazine and did not lock back. It's a fairly common problem if you run an aggressive thumbs forward grip and you wear gloves, because you don't feel when you ride up over that slide stop. So it is something you have to be aware of. I've had to modify my grip over the years so that my thumbs are not cocked as aggressively forward, so that I prevent engaging that slide stop. The rest of it, though, the gun performed absolutely flawlessly, and we shot this thing mag after mag after mag to the point where the slide was so hot you couldn't manipulate it without wearing gloves. You could obviously shoot the handgun without gloves on because the polymer stays cool enough through even exaggerated firing cycles that you have no problems gripping the handgun. But when you run your thumb up to release the slide on a magazine change, you would burn your thumb. And even with the gloves that I was utilizing, I was using a set of Mechanics 0.5 gloves. They were actually not providing me enough protection between my thumb and the side of the slide, and I was starting to get very uncomfortable every time I went to drop the slide. So we did get it very hot. We didn't lubricate it at all. It came right out of the box and went right into the firing cycle, and we didn't have any problems at all. This is not surprising. This is pretty much what I expected from a Glock. Now, we did do some tests that were intended to cause the gun to malfunction. I did do some limp wrist shooting. One of the styles of limp wrist shooting that I did was just simply holding the gun with my middle finger and my thumb behind the handgun to catch it when it recoils, and then pulling the trigger with my index finger. And through that, the gun fired just fine. It recoiled, it ejected. We didn't have any problems there. Now, the other form of limp wrist malfunction that we did is holding the handgun very, very low as you possibly can, while still getting your finger on the trigger and depressing the trigger safety, and allowing the handgun to fire and then to recoil backwards on its own. Now, this will normally cause a malfunction in a semi-automatic handgun, at least a blowback operated semi-automatic handgun, and I wanted to see how the Glock would handle it with the difference in the slide length and the grip length, and it managed to eject the cartridge some of the time. Most of the time, it wouldn't even eject the cartridge. It would just rechamber the fired cartridge. And the problem there is the slide actually takes the energy from the shot to push it to the rear. But you have to have a decent grip on the frame in order to resist that rearward motion with the frame. It's much easier for the frame just to go with the slide, since you have the recoil spring in there resisting the slide's motion. So if you grip it down too low, the frame just goes with the slide. You don't get enough rearward travel for the slide, and it's just a matter of physics. The gun can't operate when you do that. And again, when I was doing it, I was doing it with the intention that I knew it was going to malfunction. I just wanted to see how the mode of malfunction went, if it stovepiped or if it just wouldn't eject. And it just didn't eject at all. So something to keep in mind, don't hold the handgun like that. Now, there are a bunch of arguments out there on limp wrist malfunctions and if it's a viable test or a reasonable test or not. But hey, we were looking for stuff to do as we fired through 1,000 rounds. So I went ahead and shot it through that. You can hold the handgun very, very loosely and it will still function as long as you have a high grip. If you hold the handgun really, really low, even if you have a tight grip, it's going to malfunction. So that's one just to keep in mind. Now, I did go through a number of different drills where I loaded an empty magazine with one round in the chamber just to test if the handgun locked back. I did this for 2 consecutive 17-round magazines, and it locked back on every single shot. Part of that was because earlier in the test we had that failure to lock back, so I wanted to make sure that I couldn't reproduce that, which I was unable to do so, staying clear of the slide release. So no problems at all, and the Generation 5 magazines worked absolutely flawlessly. Throughout the test, we shot Generation 5 magazines, earlier generation metal line magazines. They were all metal line drop-free magazines. We also shot Magpul GL magazines, both the standard 17s and also the 21-round GL magazines, and they all functioned very well. We didn't have any ETS magazines with us to try, so that was the one popular magazine type that I didn't try. But with all the factory Glock magazines and the Magpul GLs, the pistol functioned absolutely fine, functioned just as it should, and all of those magazines dropped free. Now, a couple of words on the features. The magazine well, I'm a big fan of this magazine well on here because it really adds a minimal amount of bulk on the magazine, and it really does add a good deal of functionality. These flares clear out the edge of the frame far enough that you're not constantly catching the edge of the magazine on the edge of the frame. If you do a lot of dry fire manipulations, then you know when you're doing it with an empty magazine with no dummy rounds in it, occasionally you will hook that magazine on the edge of the frame here. And that really has not been a problem doing these manipulations faster and faster and faster, even with empty magazines with no dummy cartridges in them. So I really like that. And again, the added functionality of you have that on there, but it doesn't bump you out to a different class because Glock has included it as a factory feature. So if you're going with the Gen 5 G34, that's a great thing to have for a competition gun. Now I want to talk a little bit about who the Glock 45 is for, because we have the Glock 19, we have the Glock 17, we've had them for years. Who would buy a Glock 45 instead of a 17 or a 19? Well, it's a really interesting question, and it's one that I fought with when I purchased the Glock 45. Glock didn't send this to us. I bought it with my own money. It's going to go into our collection. I wasn't sure initially if it was one that I was going to keep beyond our test and evaluation, or if it was going to get resold on the secondary market. First of all, my hand is perfectly sized for the Glock 19, and I have a Gen 4 19 sitting right here. And as I wrap my hand around it, you'll see that you can just barely see the magazine well sticking out below it. Now, if I didn't have the magazine well on it, you would just see the edge of the factory magwell, or the edge of the grip, sticking out there. So my hand is perfectly sized for the 19 grip. My daily carry is a Gen 4 19, so I have the 15-round magazine capacity, the perfect length grip, and I have an abbreviated slide that carries very easily in appendix mode, and I don't have any problems sitting down for long periods in a car or sitting down in a chair. It doesn't dig into anything important. So for me, the 19 length slide and the 19 frame is perfect. There's really no reason for me to go to a Glock 45 because the 19 conceals very well. When you're concealing a handgun, generally the problem to conceal is the grip. The grip is what sticks out and prints. The grip is what pushes against your t-shirt, bangs into other things, or if you carry behind the hip, the grip is what pushes against your seat back and wants to twist the gun out of position while you're sitting in a car or sitting in an office chair. So the longer grip can generally be a problem, and if you don't need it, then you don't want it. So shooters like me that have no problems with the 19 probably don't need the 45, and you would probably be better off just purchasing a Gen 5 Glock 19. Now, if you have larger hands and the Glock 17 grip fits you, but you shoot a lot of competition, you shoot a lot of stuff, or you carry your handgun outside the pants, then the Glock 17 is probably going to be a better option. If you carry your handgun with a tack light on it all the time, a larger tack light like a Surefire X300, then the Glock 17 is going to be a better option, because if you notice, the tack light sticks out further than the muzzle of the handgun. If we take this same tack light and we put it on the 45, you see it sticks out forward of the handgun. So you don't save anything here, and you get the longer sight radius of the 17 slide. You get the greater velocity of the longer 17 barrels, so it's pluses all around. Now, where the 45 really comes in is if you carry appendix like I do, you have slightly larger hands that stick off the bottom of the 19 frame, then the 45 is going to be a good option. If you're a police officer and the 9mm Glocks are authorized for carry, then the 45 may be a good option for you, because you can stick that tack light on it. You can have your high lumen output tack light. You can wear it in your duty holster. You have 17 rounds in the handgun. You can carry +2 or whatever magazines in your mag carrier. And you can have a good all-around duty handgun. You sacrifice a little bit of velocity and you sacrifice a little bit of sight radius, but you gain the ability when you clock out and you go off duty to take this handgun out, drop it in an off-duty holster or a concealment holster, and be able to have a nice smaller package, but still retain that 17 round capacity and still retain that grip size that favors larger hands. Additionally, if you run a smaller light, now this is a Olight PL Mini Valkyrie that we have right here, but the Surefire XC1s or the Enforce APLCs are the same general size blueprint. Now we have a tack light that does not extend any further than the extent of the muzzle. And again, you have a nice overall package that you can fight with, but that conceals very easily, especially if you run in the appendix carry mode. So overall, this handgun I think will appeal to somebody that still wants a full-size fighting handgun, wants a more comfortable to carry handgun than the 17 and has slightly larger hands. That really is the demographic that I think this is targeted at. Now, I'll keep it because when I go into gloved hand mode, if I take this out to handgun classes, etc., things like that, and I'm still drawing from appendix or still drawing from concealment, then the added length will help me out a little bit. I do like the flared Magwell. I do like how they remove the cutout from the front. So there are a lot of things over this handgun that I really do like. Also, of course, the front cocking serrations. Now, I still have the factory Glock plastic sights on here because I have not decided on if I'm just going to run them to see how long before I damage them, or if I'm going to go ahead and swap these out with some of the other iron sights that are on the market right now. I've got Dawson precision sights on the Glock 17, and I really like those guys. I am going to talk about night sights versus plastic sights versus fiber optic sights in a completely different video coming up, so make sure you watch out for that. Now, I've made it through this whole video without really talking about this guy here. Now, this is a Glock 19 Gen 4, as I mentioned earlier, and this is built up kind of on the Roland Special pattern of guns. Now, we could go into a whole different video about what a Roland Special is and why it was designed, but this is a compensated Glock 19, so we have a KKM compensator and barrel in here. We have a Surefire XH35 tack light on here. I've got a Magpul Magwell, and we have a Shield RMS red dot sight on here. So overall, this is supposed to be a concealable open class handgun. Basically something that you can carry in a concealed carry fashion, but when you have to draw it and use it, it gives nothing away. It is almost a full race gun in capability. So this is one of those aspects, I think, where now you will see Roland Special type guns being built on the Glock 45. Now you have the benefit of when you add the compensator to it, you are still staying about 17 length with the compensator. Actually, about Glock 34 length. It's a little bit longer than 17. So Glock 34 length with the compensator. But if you switched over and built this guy on a Glock 45, now you have the full-size grip, the 17 grip, that you can get gloved hands on a whole lot easier. So if you were going to build up a Roland Special, say maybe you were in a SWAT situation where you could carry one of these as a duty gun, then you can build that up on this guy, carry it in a regular duty holster. They will fit in the RDS holsters from Safariland, and then you'll be good to go. You have that full-size grip. Now, I generally, when I am running the Roland Special, I have Glock 17 mags with a +2 extension on them. So I still get a good deal of magazine capacity. I'm not gaining any magazine capacity going to the 45, but I am gaining that grip length, and my hand doesn't feel as crunched up on the grip running the 45 versus running the 19 with the Magwell like this. So if you are on the market to build a Roland Special, then the 45, or waiting until they introduce the 45 MOS, may be a really good option. Now, people love or hate the MOS platform. It's worked just fine for us. I do a couple little different things, like I glue the plates on when I mount them so that the plate's not going to move around or come loose. And we really haven't had any issues with the plates moving around after I install them. But if you don't want that, go ahead and just pick up a Glock 45 and have the slide machine for an RMR or an RMS or whatever your preferred optic is, and you'll be good to go. Drop that compensator on there, and you will have a full 17 grip in a standard Roland Special type Compt 19 slide. So hopefully that clears up for who the Glock 45 really will work well for, if you should buy Glock 45 or if you should go with the 19 or the 17. That is about all for this video. If you guys have any questions or comments over anything we've covered, please leave it in the comments section below or send it to us on Facebook or Twitter. If you like the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and make sure you hit that little bell icon so you're notified when we release new content. And until next time, get out and shoot.